Hi guys, so I'm quite excited today. I'm going to be sharing with you something I've been dying to do for such a long time, and that is tomato preservation. This year our tomatoes were really late to the party, so I was hoping I'd be able to do this weeks and weeks ago, but we're finally there. We've got enough. So we're going to be sharing all sorts of different ways that you can preserve tomatoes. Some of them are super easy as well. So stay tuned. Guys, it's late September here, and as you probably know, we have been waiting an awfully long time for our tomato glut. Now, we've had enough tomatoes for a month or two to keep our family going with tomatoes for salads and things, which is great. But we haven't had our usual glut yet, and we would normally have that starting in August. But it's been a month or two late, but we're finally there. So we're going to go and harvest a load of tomatoes. Down here, we've got a few already that are kind of surplus. It's more than we can get through just by our day-to-day eating, and there's a load more out on the plants. So we're going to harvest them, and then we're going to do a load of preserving. I'm going to show you lots of different ways that you can preserve tomatoes. Some really easy ones, some that are a little bit more work, and just going to give you loads of options. We're going to go around now and collect them. Now, some of the ways we're going to be preserving them, we're going to be drying them, particularly the cherry tomatoes. So they're going to basically be just like the sun-dried tomatoes you buy in the shop. They go really well with like antipasti and things like that. We're also going to be water bath canning. We're going to be freezing. There's some tips on freezing that I'll show with you, and some variations on those themes. So we're going to start in here in our little polytunnel, and as you can see, oh, got a little visitor back there, found its way out. As you can see, we have got quite a bit to collect. These yellow ones are ripe too. These are yellow tomatoes. So we're going to harvest a load of these, and then we're going to go round. I won't bring you with me around the whole garden, but we're going to just collect our tomatoes and then get back into the kitchen. So I'll see you in a sec. So this is what we've brought in. As you can see, it's a decent amount of tomatoes. It's not a massive amount, but it's certainly more than my family's going to eat before they go off. So these are the ones that we are going to process today and preserve. Before you do anything else, if you're preserving any kind of produce, it's important that you use the best produce that you have, and you don't use anything that's got any bruising or any kind of rot setting in, because that's just going to rot and transfer that to all your other produce. So I'll show you some examples. So this guy here, that I think is the sign of a little bit of blight, because we have had some blight out there. We had some blight on all our potatoes, and it's spread to some of our tomato plants, which we've ripped out. But there's some out there which are still showing a few signs that we're trying to nurse through. I think that might be blight, it might not be, but either way, it's an imperfect tomato. So we're not going to use that one. We're going to just put that to one side. Again, anything you come across like this, I mean, that's obviously got a little bit of rot. There's been something has breached the skin there, basically, be it a bug or whatever it might be, and that one started rotting. This, the same, is deformed and has gone all soft around that scar, so we're not going to be using that one. This is probably what that one looked like a week or so ago. So again, we're not going to use this one. And I'm even going to discard anything like that for the purposes of preserving. Now, nothing wrong with that. We'll eat the rest of that tomato. That'll be fine, but we're not going to preserve it. Then finally, what I wanted to show you is this. Now, this, I can't remember what it's called, but this happens when two or more tomatoes basically grow together. This is a tomato and this is a tomato. There were two blossoms on the plant about here. We're not going to be using that for preserving. So these are the tomatoes that we're going to be using for preserving. Those yellow ones you see in there, that's the variety. They're supposed to be yellow when they're ripe. And we're going to save all of those for use later in the year, while what we're having producing fresh is going to keep us going for our fresh tomatoes now. We're also going to want some saved for later in the year. We'll have to do at least another session of tomato preserving at some point as well, because the glut is going to continue. We're going to continue producing far more than we can eat until the frosts come. Okay, so we're going to start by making a tomato sauce. The reason we're going to do that is because I want to show you lots of different methods that's the one that's going to take the longest. So we're going to get that one started, and then I'll show you some of the other things while that's happening. Usually with this amount of tomatoes, I wouldn't really bother with a tomato sauce. I would freeze most of these, but because I want to show you, we're going to do some. The reason I wouldn't normally do it is because it's quite a lot of work. It's going to take a little while, and I would like to do that and save a lot of jars, but we're probably only going to get maybe 1 jar here. So it's worth doing to share with you guys, but generally speaking, it wouldn't be worth doing unless you had a lot more. If you've got this amount of tomatoes, I'm going to suggest that you use the other methods that I'm going to show you. To make our tomato and basil sauce, what we're going to do is the medium sized tomatoes we're just going to quarter and put them in the pan. The smaller tomatoes we're going to halve, and basically just have them on a medium heat. When I say medium, my numbers go up to 9 and I'm on 6, so whatever that translates to in your house. But we're gonna let them come to a boil and basically kind of break down a bit, and they're going to be boiling for, or they're going to be simmering on the heat for maybe 30 to 40 minutes. Something else I nearly forgot actually, I'm also going to be showing you how to preserve the skins and seeds to make an amazing seasoning. It's a recipe I got from Alice Fowler's book Abundance, which I've mentioned before, and it's a byproduct basically of preserving tomatoes this way. What's going to happen is at some point during this process, I'll show you that we're going to separate the seeds and the skins out, and we're going to use them to make this fabulous seasoning that is also easy to preserve and keep for a very long time. So while that is now simmering, I'm going to quickly go to my shed where I've got a few other bits of equipment that I use for canning and stuff. So I'm going to grab that, get it in, and then when I come back, I've saved a handful of tomatoes to show you all the other methods that we use to preserve them. Okay, they've started to break down a little bit. I've just turned it up to 7, just turned it up 1 notch, just to speed it up a bit because a few of them are still quite solid. I want them all to break down, then we're going to deal with them again. So next up, let's talk about dehydrating. Dehydrating is super simple. It's the easiest way to preserve pretty much anything, in my opinion. So we tend to use the little cherry tomatoes. They've got that sweetness, and that sweetness really packs a punch once they've been dehydrated. So I'll bring you over to our dehydrator now, and we'll quickly just show you. It won't take long. Basically, for the cherry tomatoes, you can do all tomatoes, but for the cherry tomatoes, we just slice them in half. So we take our 2 halves and we place them in our dehydrator like so. Now, of course, we would fill this with cherry tomatoes, and then you're going to want it on a medium heat for anything up to 6 hours or even longer. I mean, it really does depend on how many you're doing, what type of machine you're using, and how big your tomatoes are. That's going to be the biggest determining factor in how long you need it on for. But just fill your sheet or sheets, turn your dehydrator on. Like I say, we put ours on a medium heat, about 60 degrees centigrade, and what will happen in a few hours is you'll get these. These are ones that we did last year, and they're just like the sun-dried tomatoes you'd buy in the store. They, as I said, they go amazingly well as antipasti, so with your cold meats and cheeses, a little bit of olive oil, some bruschetta, something like that. They're just an amazing accompaniment to meals like that. But if you wanted, you could dehydrate your much bigger tomatoes, obviously, just by slicing them. You could dehydrate them, and you can actually rehydrate them and use them in sauces and things like that. They will have quite a strong flavour because it's all concentrated into a smaller piece of fruit, if you like, where all the water that almost dilutes the flavour has been taken out. So we'll have a stronger flavour, and it will have a sweeter flavour. But you can add them to sauces, however you see fit. So that's dehydrating. And like I say, those guys that I put in there, they're going to take, I don't know, maybe 6 hours, maybe less, maybe more. Whenever it comes to dehydrating, you can find recipes, if you like, online, which will tell you a temperature and a time, but in my experience, everything is so variable. I just put everything on for a really long time and just keep checking it. That's how I do it. The only other thing I would say is when it comes to setting your temperature. Now, some dehydrators don't have a temperature setting. That's fine. You can also dehydrate in your oven. Turn your oven on to its lowest setting, just with the light on, and leave the door open a crack. The door being open is really important because that's what allows the moisture to disappear, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to dry things, not trying to cook them. So you can use your oven, but what I was going to say about temperature is if you have a temperature setting on your dehydrator, generally speaking, the thinner something is, the higher the temperature. The thicker something is, the lower the temperature for longer. But that's a really rough rule of thumb. Doesn't always apply. Like I say, there's pages and pages online where you can find recipes relating to each individual thing. I'm just going to give my sauce another stir now, and then we're going to talk about freezing. So in preparation of this video, I actually froze a tomato last night so I can show you, because we've already used up all of last year's that were in the freezer. But for this video now, I'm going to freeze these 5 nice big tomatoes. Now these are the size that I prefer to freeze. I'll freeze any tomato, absolutely, but these are the size that I prefer to freeze. Now, freezing is a godsend when you haven't got much time. If later in the year, perhaps, I don't think it's going to happen this year because we're not cropping very heavily across the board. But there were times last year when there just wasn't time to process everything. And last year I would take bundles of tomatoes, put them in a bag, put them in the freezer. That was it. Wouldn't do anything with them because I knew that I could take them out and deal with them later. I could make this sauce, for example, at a later date after taking them out of the freezer. But if you have a tiny bit of time, what I suggest is you just score the bottom, put a cross in the bottom. So put your cross in the bottom of all the tomatoes that you're going to freeze, and then just pop them in a bag, in a freezer bag. I suck the air out so that it takes up less space in the freezer. I suck the air out with a piece of bamboo from the garden that we cut into straws. So you just pop that in the bag, down there with your tomatoes, and it's like a cheat's way of vacuum sealing. I'm going to pop this straight in the freezer, and I can take this out and use it later to make sauces or whatever with. And I'm going to take out one that I put in the freezer yesterday to show you why we put the cross in the bottom and how we can use it next. So there's our solitary tomato that we put in the freezer yesterday. It's solid as a rock. Now all we're going to do now, obviously I wouldn't normally do this with one tomato, but I'm doing it just to show you guys, is we're just going to pop it in some hot water out the hot tap. Not boiling, just nice and hot, out the hot tap for a few seconds. Then, when we take it out, the skin will just peel off. And that's all it needs, a few seconds. And look how easy that is. Done. Peeled tomato. So if you're making a sauce like this, you could arguably say it's actually easier to freeze your tomatoes first. I would suggest a lot of people, when they want to peel tomatoes, they dunk them in boiling hot water, then cool them down. It's probably even easier, if you think a day in advance, to pop them in the freezer, score them, pop them in the freezer, and then you're going to have your peeled tomato. So simple. So that's how we freeze tomatoes. That's why we score the bottoms, and then we would use them for sauces afterwards. Well, this sauce has been simmering for about 20-25 minutes, something like that. So we're going to take a potato masher, and we're just going to try and mush it all up. What we're trying to do is just separate all the flesh from the seeds and the peel. Now those seeds and peel are what we're going to be making this amazing dried seasoning out of next. But we just need to separate everything. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass it through a sieve to try and catch all of those bits that we do not want in our sauce particularly. The odd bit won't hurt, but that we do definitely want for our seasoning. Okay, so we're just going to pass this through that sieve. So I'm just working the last of the juice through the sieve here, and then we're going to put the seeds and the peel, the skins, all that we're going to put on a sheet of greaseproof paper, and we're going to basically just lay it out flat and put it in the dehydrator. And then when that's dehydrated, we're going to basically crush it all down and mix it with some crushed chili pepper, dried, and some salt and pepper. And that's going to make this amazing spicy tomato seasoning, which is going to be just incredible on things like eggs and bacon, or even just on potatoes. It's just packed full of flavour and absolutely delicious. So we're going to get as much of the liquid out at this stage as we can, because we want as much of that for our tomato sauce as possible. Okay, I think we're nearly there. So we're going to use the dehydrator again to dry this mush of skin and seeds, but of course you can use exactly the same principles as we spoke about earlier with the oven if you don't have a dehydrator. So we'll cut some greaseproof paper to sit on our dehydrating trays, and then we're just gonna, if you've ever made fruit leather, we're going to use the same principles really. We're just going to spread it out fairly flat. The only difference is we don't need it to all stay together. It doesn't matter if it goes into pieces, because we're going to grind it into a dust anyway, or into flakes to mix with our salt, pepper and chili flakes. So we're just going to spread it out on this tray like that. And that's going to go in our dehydrator. And for me, it's quite important to do things like this, because otherwise it feels like by preserving your tomatoes, making a sauce, it can feel like you're wasting so much of the plant otherwise. And this is a great way of not wasting any of it. And not only not wasting it, but also preserving it. Once this is dried into our seasoning, this is going to keep indefinitely almost, you know, just like salt and pepper. The fact that it's going to be with some salt isn't going to hurt. And the fact that it's going to be dehydrated is going to stop any of the nasty bacteria growing on it, so long as we keep it that way. There's our second tray, all spread out. That goes in there with our few cherry tomatoes. You know, there's only a couple of cherry tomatoes in there because I didn't really need to do any today. I've just done them for your sake, for the sake of this video, just to show you. So I'm going to do a quick bit of washing up, and then we're going to finish our sauce. Now it's fairly thin at this point, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just reduce it down on a fairly high heat. We're just going to evaporate a lot of the water out of it and just thicken it up until it's at the consistency you want it, until it's at the consistency you want it for a sauce, whatever sauce you want. So I'm personally aiming for a pasta sauce style sauce. Okay, so I'm happy with the consistency of that now. So I'm just going to add my basil and a bit of salt and pepper. The other thing we're going to add is some acid, something to acidify it. Now, if you're going to store something for long-term storage, if you're going to use canning, be it water bath canning or pressure canning, then you're going to want to look at whatever recipe suits that method. But for water bath canning, we can can this in jars using just a water bath with no specialist equipment, and it will store almost indefinitely just at room temperature. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of lemon juice to it, because we need to increase the acidity a little bit. Acidity is what's going to prevent botulism, which is obviously the scary bit. If people are canning and they're not really sure about it, they're just getting into it, botulism is the thing to be scared of. But by increasing, or rather by decreasing the pH, increasing the acidity to under 4.6 pH, then botulism isn't going to be able to survive the spores. So we're going to put, for every 500 ml of liquid, you want to add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm just going to add a bit more basil. I want quite a bit in there. Now, we've grown several basil plants, and we've dried a fair amount already for use later on in the year. So I'm not too worried if we end up using most of this plant here. There's our basil. Now we're going to add some salt and pepper and some lemon juice. So as I said, it's 1 tablespoon per 500 ml, and we've got roughly a litre here. Very, very roughly. It's a little under, I think. I've got my jam jars in the oven, sterilising. So now you've got your sauce, tomato sauce, to this stage. You've got 4 choices. You can either use it straight away, so I could just leave it on the side, use it tonight, in tonight's dinner. I could let it cool and then put it in the fridge and use it within a week or 2. I could let it cool and put it in the freezer, and it will store in the freezer pretty much indefinitely. And the last option, if you want to store it for long-term storage, but you don't have room in your freezer, or you don't want to use the space in your freezer, you can do what I'm going to do, and you can basically water bath it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it in this water bath. Now, water bath is exactly what it sounds. It's basically just a big pot with water in that I'm going to be able to submerge my cans in boiling water for around 40 minutes. Now you can do this with any pot. Obviously I've got this one which is specifically designed for it, which just makes it that little bit easier. But these guys go in there, make sure they're completely submerged. This tray holds them off the bottom. And then we just bring this to the boil, which is going to take another few minutes. It's almost there. It's on the heat. But we bring that to a rolling boil for 40 minutes. And then that will be fine to store at room temperature, just like you would a canned product that you bought in the shops. Before I end this video, we'll just check in on the paste that we've got in the dehydrator. So it's only been in there an hour or so, and as you can see, it's already starting to dry out. Literally all we're going to do with that is we're just going to crush it up with a pestle and mortar, or you don't even need to do that if you don't want to. You can just break it up and add it to a mill like this. You can mix it with anything you like, but I mix it with salt, pepper and chili flakes, and that just gives me an amazing table seasoning for all kinds of things. So that's going to wrap up today's video, and we have done, I don't know how many ways. We've frozen, we've dehydrated, we've made the paste seasoning, we've also canned our tomatoes. So there's lots and lots of options for you. Some are a little bit of work, some are super easy, but there are definitely lots of ways that you can be preserving your excess tomatoes. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful, and I will speak to you soon. So if you find these videos valuable, please make sure you subscribe to our channel. We're producing content like this almost every day. Make sure you press that like button and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. If you know a way of preserving tomatoes that I'm not using here in this video, then please do let me know. I'm always looking to learn more. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers. Bye.